Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Preamble. That would have been a good preamble.
I was just giving you golden preamble.
I know, right? But
that was the whole point of what I was just saying.
Oh, I thought you were just doing a mat, you know. I didn't
well,
want to
that
be
too.
rude and interrupt and, you know, make you look a fool while we're doing a whole intro that people can listen to. Hey, everyone! Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am a geek for fun.
I'm that Matt Kid.
And I'm Steve.
And today, we are doing something that I don't think, if you're on a comic book related YouTube channel, I would be very surprised if this would need an introduction. This is probably one of the biggest media successes with a comic book thing, even including movies, what this franchise ballooned and became, and kind of changed an industry forever. And that is Batman Arkham Asylum for PS3, Xbox One, and then remastered with a port that happened for PlayStation 4 and all the other next-gen consoles, and what have you. So, given all of that, and you guys have all probably played it already, I want to ask the guy who suggested it, Steve, why did you want to talk about Batman Arkham Asylum?
So when I proposed it last week, I actually just finished replaying it because, you know, Corona and quarantine and bored and nothing to do, and I just happened to have all the Arkham games saved on my PS4. But I wanted to talk about it because in replaying it, especially with the retrospect of what the Arkhamverse became, I had this weird dissonant moment where I realized I really like the Arkham games, and I really hate the Arkhamverse. And I just wanted to talk about that because it's weird.
That's interesting. So I guess, and obviously as we go deeper into this, I'm sure it will balloon into just the general thing of the franchise because, again, it became so big and all-encompassing and kind of dominated Batman media for a little bit, even while the movies were still going on, which is kind of a big testament to just how much people grabbed onto this. But on Arkham Asylum itself, yeah, this was kind of something where when this came out, everyone was just like, oh my god, superhero video games are good again. It's not just Spider-Man. Other people can do it. This is a miracle. This is the second coming of Christ. Batman looks like Batman. Because, well, in the era this came out, we were right in Nolan. So to see such a comic book take on Batman was wild, and I think that's what got a lot of people interested in just from just like the trailers and stuff. And then when it came out, it just got 10 out of 10s all across the board and kind of blew up and it became a critical darling. In hindsight then, removed from all of that, and going back to it now, do you guys, this is a thing I'd be interesting to open with, do you guys have a different experience with it now than what you remember when it was still fresh? If you played it when it was still fresh, of course. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, Matt.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This was a game that was like you said, super hotly anticipated. I mean, I remember getting the Game Informer issue that was the big cover story for Arkham Asylum, and it's so odd to go back and revisit this game now that you've played and all the sequels and things like that. It's still, the thing about Arkham Asylum versus the others, it still strikes me as this like amazingly kind of insular experience. It's just this like really well executed borderline Metroidvania 3D game that just it's short, it's sweet, it knows exactly what it wants to do, and barring a few misgivings I have about it, it pretty much nails on exactly what it's trying to be. It never overstays its welcome. It's such a tight game, and especially going back now when like all the big AAA games are like super giant 40-hour affairs, going back and playing a game that's like I mean, you can 100% this game in terms of getting all the Riddler trophies and the story in like 10 hours maybe. And so like going back and playing a game that's so short and sweet and just knows exactly what it wants to be, it's really refreshing. It's something that just doesn't happen as much in the AAA industry anymore. And it's so cool the way that this game handles its world design in taking a relatively small space and making it feel massive with the way that it handles the details, the way that it has that Metroidvania style of, unlocking areas that you couldn't get to before. So coming back to it, I don't know that I like love it as much as I loved it when I was first playing it when I was much younger, but it's such a refreshing game to come back to because it does not feel bloated in any way, and that's so cool. And you just don't get that as much in AAA games these days.
That's one of the things where when you go with Arkham Asylum and what Rocksteady was kind of just the pitch that you see all over on the box on every Arkham game almost is, and all the reviews is this really made you feel like Batman, and that's kind of become a meme on of itself. But for the time and still to this day, it is a Batman simulator, and I can't oversell how cool that is as a thing to have, where you can use all the gadgets that Batman would use. You can fight and take out 20 guys in a room like Batman would, fast and mobile, bang, 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 bang. You can solve puzzles, you can do the detective things, you can glide, you can find all the villains, you can, like, the greatest hits thing. It really did feel like they wanted to create the ultimate Batman experience. Specifically, so of course, where'd you set that? Arkham Asylum, which was almost conceptually, it's designed to be a video game level, right? It's like Arkham Asylum feels like a Mega Man boss rush. Like it feels like you're just gonna walk in a room and it's the Riddler, it's Solomon Grundy, like so on and so forth in the comics. So translating to that video game works really, really well. You don't have to do an open world, even though it is kind of like. You can travel across the asylum, but there is a clear difficulty curve, and you do go from area to area to area to area, rather than in later games where it is kind of more, you can pick where you want to go and make your own adventure. So I do really respect it for that. I do really respect it for the focus. I think my issue, in hindsight, when looking at it back objectively, is this one always felt like the weakest to me, at least now. Because of I guess my hottest take with the Arkham franchise is I don't think any of the Arkham game stories are good. I think they're all pretty meh to bad. I don't actually like a single Arkham game story, and we can get into that to see if that is truly the hottest take of them all. But so the stories aren't why I go to these games. It is always mainly purely the gameplay. And this one is the one that it's still good, it still works, it's still fun. But it is so bare bones compared to the others, and it isn't as polished or refined. There are some bits where it gets a little janky, and the situations can get a little bit repetitive, where after we've seen what Rocksteady does with the franchise gameplay-wise, coming back to this one always does feel like I've... very Metroid, where I've had all these upgrades and then I come back to this and I'm just naked now. I can't do all the things that I'm used to with muscle memory and so on and so forth. So Arkham Asylum I still have fun with, but it's definitely the one of the Arkham games I would personally rate the lowest. And it's the one I have the hardest time getting through, even though it's the shortest, which is funny. So I guess that might make me the outlier, unless Steve has a different opinion.
I feel like I have the same opinion in the opposite direction, or at least something to that vein. Because I was replaying this, and I very consciously chose to replay this as opposed to City or Origins or Arkham Knight, because I got really, really tired of, like Matt was saying, like hyper expansive games where like you get past the first loading screen and suddenly you feel like you have to look up 4 or 5 guides to figure out what path you should take first. Like it doesn't feel like you're going for a ride sometimes. It feels like you're just doing a bunch of homework to figure out how you should play the game. And I mean, some people will enjoy that. Sometimes it's fun. Like I like Dark Souls as much as anybody else. I like The Witcher and that kind of stuff. But the worlds are just too big, and when you have too many options, I get bored really fast because I feel like there's no right way to play the game. So I had that with the other Arkham games, and I tried to go back to Arkham City last weekend, and I just couldn't because it felt like there was just too much, and it was boring me. Um, I think this is actually the best of the Arkham games because it's not trying to be impressive, and it's not trying to reinvent the wheel, and it doesn't feel like it's the start of anything spectacular. It honestly feels like this is a Batman one shot. It reads like a Batman one shot. It plays like a Batman one shot. There should not have been anything after this, and I did not need comic books in this universe. I didn't need action figures. I didn't need an entire aesthetic devoted to this. It's just this pure fun one-off experience that I think is really, really enjoyable. My biggest gripe with it, relating to the other games and going back, is the free flow combat is nowhere near as smooth. And I didn't realize that going back into it because the way the other games worked is you could sort of pick the direction you free flowed into so that you didn't just face first into a punch by somebody and break your combo. And in this game, you can't. You just kind of get like thrown to whatever person is closest, regardless of whether or not they could hit you and break your combo. And so your combo meter, like if you do really, really well, you can get like a 20 or a 30, but it's really hard. Versus even just like the opening of Arkham City, you can get 30, 40 hit combos, no problem. And that felt kind of janky to me. But aside from that, this feels like the ultimate Batman game to me, and it's got an equal balance of everything. There's enough Predator missions, there's enough just random thugs. The city, or not the city, but the asylum changes shape with the way the story develops in a way that isn't super jarring like it gets with Arkham Knight. But also not overly subtle and unimportant in the way it does with Arkham City. I think it's just bare bones enough that I legitimately enjoy playing it because I can just like wake up at 9 o'clock on a Saturday, burn through the whole game, and then figure out what's for lunch. It's just like it's like reading a one shot.
Yeah, I actually very strongly agree with that. I think that's really well put. There's something just about the experience of playing through Arkham Asylum that I don't think is matched by any of the other games. And that's certainly not a slight at any of them because I think each of the games, even the ones I don't like as much, have their strengths. And certainly with this one, there's definitely, you can feel the jank for sure. And you can also feel kind of the repetition. I think one thing that Rocksteady definitely improved on was their gameplay mechanics, their combat mechanics, their boss fights. Like a lot of people praised Arkham City for actually having boss fights that didn't suck, which I think is very fair because I think most of the boss fights in this are either repetitive or bad or both. And so while I think there's a lot of mechanical improvement between Asylum to City to Night, like each of those games, you see like the mechanics getting smoother. You feel like you're just more in control of Batman in a more nuanced way. I do feel like there's something to be said for just the experience of what Arkham Asylum was and what it still is and kind of what it represents that just for me hasn't quite been replicated by any of the others.
And I think it's also fair, because we mentioned some of this earlier, but the context for this game is also really important. Because this came out in 2009, and if you were a Batman fan in 2009, you had The Dark Knight with no idea whatsoever if Dark Knight Rises was even getting made because there was so much back and forth with Warner Brothers about how to do that. You had Brave and the Bold on TV, which a lot of people like now, but when it came out, most people refused to watch it. Mm-hmm. And you had Grant Morrison on Batman, right on the cusp of DC doing, I think Final Crisis was around this time. It might have been maybe a year or two before or after. But like the DC universe was like in this chaotic flux. The Batman comic was, if you weren't an avid Grant Morrison fan, completely indecipherable. And then they announced this game and they're like, oh great, are they just adapting Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum comic? And it turns out it's none of those things, and it's just like a quintessential Batman experience where it's a familiar Batman voice, it's a familiar Joker voice, it's got no before gameplay context, it's got no after gameplay context, it's just Batman's a dude in a bat costume, and his parents died, and these are all the villains, and he's got sidekicks and oracles in the radio, and you just go and play. Like, this was the most jumping on point Batman thing you had at the year it came out.
And I think that is probably its strength. I think this was the thing that really created a lot of Batman fans who, like you see now, are the ones campaigning for Oracle to be Barbara, are the ones campaigning for Harley Quinn to be a villain, are the ones going for this status quo, which was kind of... it wasn't the status quo at the time, but it was the closest to the 90s, early 2000s Batman status quo. What you'd imagine the end of the animated series would be. You'd even see... when the Batman did like a flash forward, it would be where Oracle's is tech guy, he's got Nightwing, and he's Batman, he's kind of got a bulkier build. This was what many people pictured as just jump in Batman. This is where Batman just is. It's not an origin story, but it's also not the end of his rope either. So no, you're right. That is definitely its strength. And I think that being, if this whole franchise had just stayed that, where it was just kind of playing in that world at different points, and you'd jump in and jump out, and there wouldn't necessarily be these long overflowing plot threads, I think it would have been better overall. But just considering this game and it doing that route, while I do think that's the smart play, I'm not a fan of just because it's safe and entry level, it doesn't have to be so, I guess, underwhelming. Like if you take it apart, because I don't see many people mention this when they talk about Arkham Asylum. If you take apart the plot of this game, Joker traps Batman in Arkham Asylum so he can steal a souped-up version of Venom called Titan and infect a whole bunch of people and himself, and then unleash it and control Gotham. What the fuck? Like, that is such a weird Joker plot to me. Like, that is so... I mean, it's the Joker, so you can't do anything with him. But the idea of that being what the narrative here is, it doesn't really... It's not trying to say anything about Batman. It's not really playing on the Batman-Joker idea. There's good lines of dialogue, and there's good interactions between them. But actual themes through the story aren't really a thing here. Like, there's no reason why Poison Ivy is here except for just a cool boss fight. And then obviously you got the justification of the Titan form and everything, but it's just like, what does that have to do with any of these characters' relationships and such? Whereas later on, I feel like we actually, although you're right, they go completely off the rails with the verse, there is more of an emphasis to make these stories more character-based, which is why I lean towards them more. Whereas Arkham Asylum feels very much... Batman isn't really challenged as a person, and you can tell stories like that, which are fine, but going back now after this is what makes me feel like, ooh, that hasn't aged the best. But that could just be me.
I don't know. It's weird, too, because you're 100% right in that the Titan plot is kind of mediocre and stupid. The only kernel of, like, character building is this idea that Batman has this fear of being just as insane as, like, the criminals he fights, and we get that with, like, the Scarecrow segments, and those are something we definitely are going to want to talk about. But it feels like those Titan story elements are just kind of there as a justification for why we're going to have, like, big, burly kind of monster boss fights. Which, don't get me wrong, it's a video game. I get wanting to do that. But at the same time, those are all, like, pretty bad. Like, most of the Titan monsters are really annoying to deal with and not fun. So it kind of adds insult to injury a little bit, where it's like, yeah, it's not a super compelling overarching plot. And it seems to just be a justification for bad boss fights. But what I will say for this game is... this game is like, I hold this game in the same regard as something like BioShock. Like, part of the reason you play it is, or even like Bloodborne. Like, yes, part of the reason you play it is for the fun action and things like this. But this game so beautifully engrosses you in this world of Arkham Asylum. Like, there's so much love and care and attention put into crafting Arkham Island to just make it feel like this real living, breathing place. And in an interactive medium like video games, you can really do that well with like I mentioned, games like BioShock and things like that. And so this is a game that I hold on that level of pedigree when it comes to just the environment in which the story takes place. There's something so fucking cool about exploring Arkham Mansion, going into the sewers underneath the island, going through the penitentiary and seeing all the inmates and things like that. Like, god damn, is it just phenomenal. And for me, when I'm just in those moments, the sort of wonky overarching story kind of fades away because I'm here for this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think because the Joker stuff in this is terrible. But I'm also one of those weird people that thinks Joker in the Arkhamverse period is terrible and obnoxious, and I hate him. I don't like the design. I think the design's awful. I don't like Mark Hamill. I think Mark Hamill's performance in all of the games just does not work. I also don't think Kevin Conroy works in this. I don't like any of that stuff.
Oh,
We'll
hot takes are flying.
We'll get there. I think Mark Hamill should have retired 10 fucking years ago, and that still would not have been soon enough because this game still would have come out.
You hear that, Mark? You thought Steve was your friend after Last Jedi. He's coming for you.
But I agree with Matt in that it's the vibe and the aesthetic of this game in general that I think is so engrossing and interesting. Like, Arkham City doesn't have a distinct feel to it. It's just got the same color palette as this game, except it's bigger. Arkham Knight's kind of the same thing to me. Arkham Origins vaguely has a better look to it just because it's Christmas and like everything looks better during Christmas. That's why Shane Black sets all his movies during it. So I like the idea that this whole game is more of just this meta Batman experience where you feel what it's like to be him, you feel what it's like to be afraid as he would, you feel the same sort of power he does, the same sort of like it's been a long day and after it's over there's still stuff to do on the island, like this whole sort of like war goes on mentality that Batman has. And the Scarecrow stuff is definitely like the narrative and thematic highlight of the game. Mm-hmm. But I feel like there's enough of that sort of sprinkled throughout with all of the villains and all of the random encounters that it's fun and it's interesting and it's engaging. I think that it pulls the right sort of message from Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum, even though it's nowhere near as good as that, where the thing that's interesting is not necessarily the plot of what's happening, but that through each layer of the asylum, you get a different idea of the things Batman as a person has to overcome, and that you, as someone playing this game, have to overcome. The Predator missions being distinct from the boss fights, the Poison Ivy thing kind of being an entire island-wide thing, Batman being so paranoid that he's got a Batcave underneath Arkham Asylum. I think all of that's fun and interesting. I know a lot of the reviews genuinely hate all the boss fights. I think most of the boss fights are bad, but I do genuinely really like the Killer Croc boss fight. Yeah. I think that's a fun sort of situation where there's sort of like a Jaws thing where you're like running around the tunnels and you're just trying to like avoid him. It goes on too long, like most of the boss fights do in this game, but it's unique and it's interesting and it gives us a side of Batman that we don't get to see very often because you just physically can't. So I don't agree with you in that like it's without theme. I just think that the kind of themes it's executing are so like ingrained to video gameplay, and that are things that we have so far moved beyond after this game that it's hard to see in retrospect. And I still really appreciate what it feels like to play this game because I just don't like where we go after this.
Ooh, before Alfie rebuts, I want to get in on this real quick.
Sure.
That is part of the reason why, because the thing about this game, like when I was mentioning how it doesn't have that bloat, it's a very short experience relatively. Part of that, what you were just saying about how the game makes you really kind of absorb what it's like to be Batman. I would almost argue that this game is best experienced by sitting down and playing it through in 8 hours. Because you can do it. This game can be beaten nearly 100%ed in 8 hours. And that's so cool because the game is one night. It is supposed to take place over the course of one night in real time. And Arkham City does the same shit where it's just like Protocol 10 will commence in 4 hours. And I'm like, well, that was 10 hours ago. I'm trying to find Hush right now. Shut up. Like, so whereas this game, it's like really even doing everything, it can be beaten in the span of an actual real time night. And I think that's so cool. So
I
anyway,
agree completely.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that definitely is something where it's an appeal to it. That you can, like I said, this is probably the one where, although it doesn't give you all the tools that you'll get in later on for a Batman simulator, this is the one that most feels like, oh help! I just got reincarnated into the body of Bruce Wayne. like you're just here now in a Batman night, and you just have to stick it and play through it. That is probably, if you were going to put an asterisk to anyone who wanted to play Arkham Asylum, put themselves in that mentality. Just make sure you've got a free night and just do it in that one night. You'll be you might be tired by the end of it, depending on your stamina for video games and stuff, but you'll come out of it feeling like, all right, I'm Batman. And then, I don't know, do a Two-Face challenge map or something to be fully canon. So all of that I do agree with. All of that I do think is the strength of this game. And I don't want to come across like I am shitting on. This is still one of my favorite games of all time. It's just because when I compare it to the others, and if I have the choice of on a shelf, I do think it is important when you're creating something to be able to look at, especially for video games, which are things you can just replay over and over and over again, to look at what you're getting in terms of substance. And I'm not saying in terms of, because like, say one of my favorite games like Sonic 3, you can play that back to front and everything, and there's like little secrets and nooks and crannies, everything like that, but it's very focused gameplay in that sense. This, I feel like, has what you guys are saying, where it is this Batman experience, you don't really need to focus on the story, but so much of this is still trying to make you care about the story, that it's clear that they had the right idea, but I think they got a little too ahead of themselves in terms of actually executing that. You can't do, like, say this was going to be completely hypothetical remake style, right? The idea that you have there would fit something like Breath of the Wild, where your skill as a player tells how long it's going to take, in terms of, if you're good enough, you can just take the Joker down and stop any of this before it happens, right? And make it a speedrunning type game. How fast can you stop the Joker's plan in one night, kind of thing, and go through all of that. And like you say, it's more environmental. The Scarecrow boss fights, the Crocs boss fights. You're right, Steve, they make you feel like Batman would in those moments. But they're also interrupted by loads and loads of cutscenes and slow platforming where you have to listen when the distance between the two sides of the asylum, you're running through it so they can play the Joker announcements, which will give you important plot details, and they're just long enough between the loading screens and everything about that, where it feels less refined. And a lot of that is just technical limitations, just because when this came out, it was still in that kind of early-ish era of the PlayStation 3 generation, so it does feel like, well, they tried their best and they did the best version of that. But comparing that to, say, Arkham Knight, or even Arkham Origins, I feel does the conceit of doing it in one night better. Because once you've got that, you can approach where you want to go and do what you want to do as Batman would, and you can prioritize things. You mentioned, Matt, about like the Hush, like, Arkham City is going to do this in so and so hours, but I'm over here dealing with Hush. The way Arkham City is structured is there are different threat levels, and there are missions which are like, okay, I need to blow up these things for Bane. What would Batman do in that? Oh, if I see one, I'll take it out, but I'm busy at the moment, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to focus just on that. So you as a player can focus on the main quest, and then once it's done, then it's more realistic that Batman would be around the city and trying to stop things. With Arkham Asylum, it doesn't really make any sense that after the events of this would be done, oh yeah, now I'm going to run around and try and get the Riddler and find Quincy Sharp is secretly the soul of Amadeus Arkham. It feels more contrived at that point to do the missions post-game, because this is such a like, it should just feel like once credits roll, it's just back to beginning. And if you couldn't do everything in this side of this quest where Batman spends one night at Arkham, then you really should have done it. In my opinion. So I feel like you're right conceptually. It's really, really strong. Probably the strongest idea for a Batman game we've had yet. But I don't think the execution's quite there. I think they tried to have their cake and eat it. And later on, they refined, mixing the balance between trying to tell a narrative with actual gameplay. Whereas this feels like if they just focused more on the gameplay, you would have had a stronger overall product. Moving away from that, though, I do want to mention one thing that I want to get your guys' thoughts on, because this has influenced Batman media since just everything. What do you think about the aesthetic of this game? The character designs, the tone, all of that?
I like some of them. I hate some of them.
Go into it.
Yeah, I remember seeing the Game Informer article for this and just being like, oh, why does Batman look like he can't even move his arms above his head? Like, Jesus, fuck. So here's one thing I'll say about the aesthetic of the Arkhamverse and why I think it took off in the way that it did. This is one of the best, probably until like the MCU. This is one of the best, like, let's really try to make something that feels real, like feels that kind of gets that like real world grittiness, but doesn't lose the fantastical side of things. And I feel like this really nails that in kind of a cool way. It's like, so yes, Batman's a little bit more armored up. He looks like he's wearing like a tactical armored suit that somebody might actually wear if they were going to spend their night punching crime. But it's still got the trunks. It's still gray and black. Joker still just wears a big purple suit. I think that's really what struck a chord with people, is that this is almost like what I would have wanted from a realistic Batman movie. Like, let's try to find something that meets that quota of this feels realistic and gritty and dark, but doesn't lose the color palette, doesn't lose the absurdity, doesn't lose this, that, and the other. Having said that, I still don't know that it's personally my cup of tea. I've always preferred a leaner Batman with a stupidly large cape that's a little bit more moody looking, a little bit more less tactical and more just kind of ominous. I would say that this aesthetic probably is my favorite over all the other Arkham games, arguably. I think this one nails kind of the look it's going for better than the other ones. I don't really agree with Steve. I think the Joker design is fine. I think most of the character designs in this are fine. And some of them are outright phenomenal, like Scarecrow. Some of them are kind of like Killer Croc's not that great. I think Ivy's pretty good. So I mean, for the most part, I like the aesthetic of this world fine. It's just not exactly my Batman, but I totally get why this struck a chord with so many people, because I think it really walks that fine line of being very, very comic booky while also kind of hitting that early 2000s grim, dark, realistic vibe.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle with that. I like the look just on like a general idea level. But when you start going case by case, it's hard to find things that I think look particularly good. I like the Batsuit a lot. I think in general of all the Arkham games, this has the best Batsuit. Because like you said, it's got the gray, it's got the trunks, it looks like a comic book Batsuit with a little bit more armor than I would like, but makes sense for a video game. It's a lot better than the other games when he does literally just go for like full scale black armor. I think that's probably its biggest strength, is that particular version of Batman. But then the villains are where it sort of breaks down, where some of them look okay, some of them look really good, and others look terrible. Bane looks awful. I
forgot.
I can't get over how everyone just draws Bane like this, and I hate it so much.
Can I say my spiel?
About Bane?
Can everyone stop fucking giving Bane a mouth?
Oh yeah, in the mask.
It's
so annoying.
It never looks good. He's meant to be everything but his face is covered to contrast Batman. He is no humanity. He is all just muscle and this fucking a gorilla, the pure id of masculinity, like this pure. He is a steroid flexed bicep, and he is coming to break you. All the intelligence of Batman but the strength aspect dialed up to like Rob Liefeld proportions. That's what makes Bane scary and cool and interesting with that lack of humanity. And every time they give him a fucking luchador like mouth with his lips, he looks so stupid, and I hate it. All right, carry on.
He looks really, really bad.
Oh no, I hate it.
That said, I do really like Killer Croc. I think he looks good. Scarecrow is, I think everyone's going to agree, the absolute best design this game has got.
Yep.
He just looks terrifying and fantastic. I don't dislike Poison Ivy's look. My problem with Poison Ivy's look is the same with my problem with Harley Quinn, which is every time we do this, we just make it somebody's fetish. And it's just obnoxious. It's definitely a bigger problem with Harley Quinn than it is with Poison Ivy. But with Poison Ivy, it's hard to like appreciate the look when every scene she's in is like shot upskirt. Like she's introduced with her ass first. Like, come on.
She's got like these green panties that kind of blend in with the natural skin tone of her body too, and it's just like. Yeah. And she's got like her prison like outfit that she's wearing like a cardigan with everything all pushed up and showy. It's something. It is I feel you there. I actually really like how Poison Ivy looks in Arkham Knight. And this I don't really care for as much. Yeah. So I feel you.
I like that she's greener. I like that there's like weeds and stuff all around. I just don't like how she's overly sexed up for no reason. And then Harley Quinn's the same problem where like Harley Quinn's outfit is just a fetish. There's no context. There's no like she's Joker's nurse thing going like there is in Arkham City. It's just a straight up fetish costume. And there's just no reason for that. Especially not for a video game that's largely being played by kids where their first exposure to female characters in Batman outside of the comics are just to see all of them as fetishes.
I'll let it slide because my wife cosplayed that Harley Quinn costume.
Fair enough.
I'll let it slide. No, I'll also let it slide because it's Arlene Sorkin. But continue. I'm sorry.
Zaz is like one of those ones that's sort of in the middle where like he doesn't look bad, but there's nothing like particularly great about him. The biggest problem I have with the Arkham game aesthetics, and this stretches to all of the games, but it's especially bad here because it's the first time, is it's really hard to appreciate what the game looks like when I'm playing 80% of it with a blue filter.
Detective mode.
Oh god, detective mode is such a bad idea.
Detective mode, which can like cycle through half a dozen filters and track someone's fucking breath.
Well, that's fine. He's Batman. But you're right, and that is something they even acknowledged. I remember reading interviews where they were like, we didn't realize people were just gonna play the entire game in the detective mode. Fuck. Like that is, I think that is just an objective thing that they admitted and they tried to rectify, but they built their entire gameplay around it basically, so they couldn't just take it out. So it was just kind of like they shot themselves in the foot with that one.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, okay, name one situation in any of the Arkham games where you are not at an advantage if you have detective mode on.
Right.
Like, come on.
Photo mode. There you go. Game, set, match.
I like the moody horror movie vibe of Arkham a lot. I just don't like that I can't look at it.
It's especially frustrating because, like a lot of games with a heavy atmosphere, the look of the asylum and kind of the colors and hues and the overtones, they kind of shift throughout the night. And sometimes I'll be playing and I'll realize I've had my detective mode on for the last like hour and I'll turn it off and I'll be like, why is everything green now? When did that happen?
Right, exactly. And then like different interiors look different and some of them have much warmer lighting. And like there's a lot of attention to detail and the game looks really good if you let it look the way it's supposed to look.
Yeah.
And I think that just comes down to player choice at that point because like you're right, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, but you're not. You can still easily. You only can just turn detective mode on and off whenever you want. So it's just depending on how much you want to play it as a. Because if it was Batman, he gets the white eyes when he does detective mode, which has always been a cool. I like the conceit of it in this. But it makes sense in the comics then why he never turns it off. Like, that's just what I
You
imagine.
just see all of these cues everywhere. Why wouldn't you take that on?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
like they just ask Batman just randomly, "Oh, do you like my new outfit?" It's like, "What are you talking about? You're all skeletons to me." Wait, we've always been skeletons. That's what the white eyes are, Bruce.
Robin's eye, he can't tell them apart.
Yeah, that's really. Someone should make that a comic. That's really funny. So we've got all of that going on, which I mean, yeah, it's just one of the things where in hindsight they probably should have figured out a way to make it like a heads up display where it doesn't change the filter of the room, but it will reveal hints and something like, I guess, like some games have done, like Spider-Man Spider Sense and stuff like that. Or maybe even like take some notes from how Iron Man does like the heads up display where he can see through it, but he's got like little details on the side of the corners of the screen and such. So maybe something like that for future Batman games, just so you're not immediately blocking out every pretty looking model that's in this vicinity. But my biggest problem aesthetically from this game, and the one I feel like people would take, that I think this is the root cause for, is I think this is the thing that forever ruined Harley Quinn's costume designs. This is what started the trend of ditching the jester costume and just making every Harley Quinn costume a different kind of fetish. Which for something that strived to be so comic accurate with everyone else, is just like, really? You had to ruin this character forever? Like, because we've seen Harley Quinn's costume now and again, but this is probably the biggest example I can remember, because in the comics at the time, she was still wearing the Jester suit, and on all of animation, she was still wearing the Jester suit. This was the first time we'd ever had a departure from that to just nurse, which, you're wrong, they do try to give an explanation for, but it's even more stupid, because they're like, oh yeah, this is how she snuck into Arkham to get into the monitor room, looking like that, apparently.
It was like, oh, did one of the guards hire like a stripper for a bachelor party?
It was just
or
like, is this
something?
Dave? Like, what's going on? So it's even more stupid when you put in that context that she just walked in through the front door dressed like that, and they didn't bat a fucking eye. But yeah, so that's the thing that this is again the biggest downgrade for. I like the Batsuits, except for the Arkham Knight one. The Arkham Origin ones is still too armored, but at least it looks like a Batman costume. Once you get to Knight, it's just Iron Man. Even to the mechanized armor and such like that. So normally I like to play the Arkham games with just, alright, 1970s yellow oval suit. And this is the one game where I can't do that, so it immediately gets down points for that. The lack of alternative costumes in this game is one of the other reasons why I don't like to come back to it, because if I can't play my blue cape Batman. But overall, I like the idea of armoring up the gauntlets at least, and making the suits texture look a bit more textural. So it's still the basic design of Batman, but it looks like it could take a bullet, which I think is the way you do adapt comic book costumes properly. Is you don't need to change the look, you can just need to make it, alright, what's the function of this, and how can we slightly make it a little bit, not even just believable, but just so it looks better in a 3D environment, rather than just flat colours.
Well, and I think the other advantage here is it came out in the right sort of period where video games are trying to look a lot more realistic, but they couldn't get away from exaggerated proportions entirely. And so by the time you get to Arkham Knight, everything looks hyper armored, but also just like hyper realistic. And in this game, it's got an armored thing, but the ears are still super long. The grapnel is absurdly giant. There's just a lot of there's enough cartoony things in it thrown into the hyper realistic environment that I think it contrasts well.
Definitely. It feels like comic book art. Like DC house style, where it's realistic, but like the eyes are bigger than normal, the shoulders are super wide, like it looks like if you took a Jim Lee drawing and just it started moving, which I think is a cool look for a comic book game. So yeah, I do agree with you there. Even if you look at the character models as well, I think you mentioned this, Matt, about like Poison Ivy. If you look at her face compared to Arkham Knight, where Arkham Knight, she's a real human being now. Yeah. Whereas in this, she's kind of got the comic book supermodel face.
She does.
So
sure.
like that's something which I think is improved on as we go in later games. But like in terms of the look of the Asylum, I think this has probably been the best example. And another kind of nerdy thing I really like about the Arkham universe is it finally gives us maps for shit. I like knowing where the different wings of Arkham Asylum are for. Like, if I was writing a Batman comic, I would just play Arkham Asylum to know the fucking layout. Because why not? It's great. It makes sense.
That's also the other change I really like that this game does, that as the games continue to exaggerate, I don't like. Like, I don't like the idea that an entire section of Gotham City becomes Arkham, but I love the idea that Arkham Asylum is not in Gotham, but it's on an island somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I love this concept that, like, the whole point of Arkham is to, like, throw everyone out of Arkham, out of Gotham City, and just push them as far away as possible. And even then, they manage to break out of this asylum on an island and still get back to Gotham.
Yep. No, I love because a lot of times in the comics and like in the animated series, Arkham Asylum has just been a building. Like, it's been just a singular thing. And so the choice to make it not only its own island that's entirely separate, but make it this whole huge thing with like multiple wings, multiple buildings. And you can feel the history in it as well, because a lot of times we do that. Like, Arkham has this fucked up history that you can learn about in some of these Batman stories. And in this, you just feel it. Like, some of these buildings you walk into and you're just like, God damn, how old is this building? And so it's all fantastic world building. Some of the best, honestly. I mean, that's why I hold this game in such high regard in its world building and hold it right up with other world building gaming masterpieces. I think it's the one thing that they nailed without question.
The other genius concept I think they had is that when you get collectible audio clips, whether it's patient interviews or Amadeus Arkham, you don't have to stay on the screen to listen to it. You can just listen to the story as you're walking around the asylum.
Yeah. It is nice. And I love those patient interviews, especially the Scarecrow and the Riddler ones, which actually I want to talk about that a little bit. Can we talk about like the voice casting and stuff like that?
Good point.
This is like ever since I played this game, if I read Riddler or if I read Scarecrow, this is what they sound like. Wally Wingert's Riddler is like, it's pitch perfect. I adore Riddler in this. And Dino's Scarecrow is amazing because that's always been what Scarecrow is to me. He's been this fucking skinny middle-aged professor dude with kind of a nasally voice who just gets really excited and is just happy to be there. And so anytime we do like the John Noble Scarecrow from Night, or we do like the season 4 Scarecrow, who is definitely scary and cool in his own way, it doesn't tick the like Scarecrow boxes for me that this does. So like those are two castings that I think are phenomenal. Kevin Conroy is fine. I've always thought Kevin Conroy was serviceable to mediocre. I think he's fine in this and City, and I would say that as well for Mark Hamill. I think Mark Hamill in this and City. I'm curious to hear what your beef is, just out of pure curiosity, because I think Hamill is fine here, and I think City would have been a perfect send off for him. And it's not until Night where I don't even feel it from Kevin Conroy. Like, I at least feel like Kevin Conroy is trying a little bit here. And then obviously this was the last time we heard Arlene Sorkin, which makes me very sad because I really do not care for Tara Strong's take on the Harley voice. So it's always kind of bittersweet to hear Arlene in this and know that it's the last time we're going to get to hear her. But outside of that, I think most of the voice casting here is really pitch perfect. I think they really do a good job of making sure you felt immersed in this world in the way they voiced all the characters and things like that. So I'm just glad they didn't let that fall to the wayside as they were trying to craft this experience.
Mm-hmm. Which I think was
Steve,
also...
go.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the voice cast is really, really solid. My problem is this was, I think, the pinpoint moment in DC animated history where we decided we will not let Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill ever go. Ever. Like, after this, it was certain that we were going to get Kevin Conroy to play Batman in everything, and we're going to keep getting Mark Hamill to play Joker in everything. Every now and then the voices will shift over, but it's always going to be them. And it gets absurd to the point where we're not really casting people the way Andrea Romano used to do, which is like she had like a laundry list of people she wanted to work with, and she would find characters that would suit the people that she wanted to work with and their personality types. And she tells that story every single time they do an animated movie. And now that's complete bullshit because they're just using the same cast over and over again. Every time we get one of these new animated movies where they're like, now it's a return to the animated universe, when did we ever leave the animated universe? When was it ever allowed to die in any sense of grace? My biggest problem with this game is the same problem I have with a lot of animated movies that aren't Pixar, which is they just get names and they don't care whether or not the person playing the character makes any sense with the model and the story they chose. Like, Batman's voice does not sound like it's coming out of his body in this game. And same with Mark Hamill. The only reason I think people can let it slide is because they know this is the voice of the Joker and they know this is the voice of the Batman. But they don't seem to, like, connect this thread here of, like, that Joker body is not making that voice. Like, it even gets to this, like, weird, absurd point where, like, I watch his lips move and I cannot comprehend how he's making that voice. It just completely takes me out of the game because it's like, you only made him sound like this because this is animated series. You didn't pick someone for this look. You didn't pick someone for this atmosphere. You just got Mark Hamill because he's Mark Hamill. And I literally can't stand that. It drives me crazy because I don't like this Joker design, but there are a lot of Joker designs I hate. When the performance works, it makes me love the design. I thought that the guy that plays Joker in The Batman made that look work perfectly, and it's a terrible look. Mm-hmm. The Joker, the Heath Ledger Joker look is not a good Joker look in my opinion, but the way Heath Ledger plays Joker, it's pitch perfect. Joker in this I didn't get an opportunity to be anything but a vehicle for Mark Hamill playing the Joker, and that just really, really bothers me. And it bothers me more that because of stuff like this, and because of the quote-unquote renown these people get for doing this, we get things like the terrible Killing Joke movie where they sound nothing like their characters or nothing like what the dialogue is conveying. And we get stuff like Justice League Action where, like, you have these, like, gruff 60-year-old men playing characters that are allegedly, like, 20 years old.
Mm-hmm. I do think that is a problem. But I'm prone to disagree with it being the problem in this case. Because like we said at the start, if you consider the environment when this came out, this was the big return to form for this cast. This was Paul Dini's back, Tara Strong's back, Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, Arlene Sorkin, we're getting everyone in. Because Tara Strong did Tara Strong do Oracle in this game as well?
I don't know. Probably.
Probably. That's just happening as a thing. But, like, this was the big return to form because at the time it was, like, again, Brave and the Bold, Justice League Unlimited had been over for a bit. There wasn't really and then following this, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill did kind of stick to just the games. They mentioned a lot of times after Arkham City, Mark Hamill said, "Oh, I'm only going to return for killing Joker, and I'm never going to do it again," which we know is total bullshit now.
Well, but I'm pretty sure he's now saying he'll do anything if Kevin Conroy says yes.
Yeah, they've just gotten over it because I think they got a taste of those. Oh fuck, we can just keep doing this forever. I think that happened later. I don't think that happened with this. I think this was more, we want to bring in the Batman the Animated Series cast because we want to create what people think is the definitive Batman experience. So we're getting the designs from the comics, and everyone loves Batman the Animated Series, so we want to bring in as much of that cast as we can. So I do think that came from a purer place. You are right, though, that if they knew that going in, because their head writer Paul Dini and everything, they really should have got their fucking concept artists to consider that and make the character models look more for the casting. Because I do think they got the casting first. I do think they just, the moment they said they were going to do a Batman game, I think Rocksteady was immediately Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. Which does go to your problem of casting on renown. But in this case, I think it works because this was meant to be such a one-shot celebration. It wasn't necessarily going to be a franchise builder that came later. So all of that, I think, gives me more leeway to like it, especially because I really like Mark Hamill in this game. I think this is one of his best Joker performances because he's just really getting to go all out with just really, because a lot of your hearing is just his audio when he's just narrating you through the game, basically on the speech announcements. Or even that intro, one of my favourite Joker moments of all time, is where you're first introduced to Killer Croc and the music swells and it's this big, holy shit, intimidating moment. And when you're younger, it's really kind of scary because it's like, holy shit, I've never seen a Batman villain who looks that intimidating. And then he leaves, and the Joker's like, "Ooh, that reminds me, I really need to get me some new shoes." Like it just cracks me up. So I actually think Hamill does a good job in this. Conroy isn't in his Justice League Unlimited prime, where for me he was just Batman. He's kind of coming out of that, but he's still really good. He's not slumming it like he is these days. So all of that, I'm willing to lean more positively. But you are right. There is definitely a problem. I just wouldn't say it's the fault of Arkham Asylum specifically.
I mean, had this been the only game that happened and there hadn't been sequels and this was the last time that Kevin and Mark voiced those characters, I mean, I'm not trying to invalidate your criticism. Maybe you would still have that criticism, but I wonder if it would be tempered slightly by that or not, because I totally understand what you're saying.
I would not hate Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill as Batman and Joker if this was the last time they did it, because if that was the case, then I would have a very small period of time of maybe like 15 years where they were the voices and that's it, and I would have nothing to complain about. I have a thing where like I don't feel like their voice is coming out of the body, but I wouldn't be mad about it.
Right, yeah.
But to push back a little bit, this is a return to form to animated series. You're right if you're Arlene Sorkin and you're Paul Dini. It's not a return to form for animated series if you're Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy, because they were still doing the voices of Batman and Joker every year up to this game. They were in all of the not all of, but they were in every Batman animated movie we got up to the release of this game. Kevin Conroy was Batman. He did Public Enemies, he did Gotham Knight, he did Mystery of the Batwoman. He did like a bunch of one-off appearances and other DC stuff, including the cartoons that we're still doing Batman right now. Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill never left, but Paul Dini did. So if you're bringing back Paul Dini, you're like, okay, we're going to reunite the animated series cast, fine. But like reunite the animated series cast. Get like Alan Burnett. Get like all of the writers' room for that series, because those are the only people that basically ran out of work.
Yeah, that's fair. That's 100% fair. Because as much as I like a lot of the voice cast, it would have been cool to see some of the other cast members and some of the other writers come back for sure. You know, from a business standpoint, I absolutely get getting Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy, because they were, I think at the time, no one can deny the ones you think of at this time when you thought of those characters being voiced in something that wasn't live action. But no, I mean, you're right, for sure. I'm still with Alfie in that it still doesn't bother me too much in this game. And if I'm being honest, it really doesn't bother me in City all that much either. But I mean, I feel what you're saying. And certainly in hindsight, it's hard not to look at it that way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like in 2009 it was fine, but like now I'm in 2020 and it's like I'm never getting another Batman Joker voice. I'm never getting another Joker voice, and it's almost entirely because of this damn game.
Yeah, that is fair. One of the things I in terms of casting that I really don't like, I think in terms of portrayal as well, is the Gordon design and voice in this game is so bad. Like, what were they? Gordon looks like he could benchball the Batman, and he's also got like the most generic voice ever given for Commissioner Cop Guy. So, like, to the point where they wisely chose to recast him for Knight, and even then, it's not necessarily how I imagine Gordon sounding. But like that he's the one in this game that stands out to most to me. Just like, they really just had no idea what to do with Gordon, so he's just there, which is, I mean, it's fair. Gordon shouldn't really be the focus in an Arkham Asylum Batman story, and he's enough problems with him as a character nowadays anyway, so you don't need Gordon, but that's the one that stands out to me most, especially because you do have, even more than Alfred, Barbara's kind of your wingman in this game. She's the one who's with you the entire time, almost guiding you through all these missions, so it makes sense to have like an emotional connection with someone you're trying to save. where they look like they should just be able to snap the Joker like a twig anyway. Why is Gordon? Why he already looks like he's on Titan? Like he's fine. Like,
Speaking of Batgirl, Kimberly Brooks, is this the first black Batgirl?
Oh, is that who voices Oracle, Kimberly Brooks?
Yeah. Is this
they
done that?
fucking
'Cause
dropped.
That's really cool.
They fucking
Maybe.
dropped the
Fantastic in
ball,
this.
then.
Yeah, she's really good. Maybe. She might be actually. I think there's two other things I would like to hit on because I know we're getting close to time. We gotta be, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
The Scarecrow segments are so cool. I want to talk about that because I feel like those are the things that like everyone when this game came out, people were talking about those. They're like, man, the Scarecrow scenes are like the highlight of the game, which is kind of cool, right? Because the Scarecrow segments are definitely kind of the big highlights of the game, and they're not even like they're not even like cool. Like, oh man, I'm fighting all these dudes, and it's a really cool fight. It's like no, it's just this trippy story sequence in the game that just everyone agrees is super fucking cool. This was certainly not the first game to do them, because obviously you had Metal Gear Solid and you had Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem that was doing stuff like this before. But I think this might have been one of the most mainstream AAA examples of a game that like pretended to fuck with your game. Because in Eternal Darkness, it pretends to wipe your save data. And Metal Gear Solid, of course, Psycho Mantis reads your memory card, and you have to move your controller to the other controller port, yada, yada, yada. But for this game to make you think your game is glitching out, especially if you played it on the 360, which was like infamous for having a bunch of shitty hardware issues, so cool, just so neat. Looking back, it's a very obvious choice, but it's something that I'm so glad they did. And it's something that they've tried very hard and failed to replicate in all the other Arkham games since this. But they're really cool. I mean, I don't have much to say about them other than that they're just fantastic and a great use of the character and a really great use of the medium with these characters.
I really like the sort of Batman walk of shame that happens at the moment of every Scarecrow interaction where like things are chill and you're just walking, but then as you're walking, things just get worse and worse, and you're freaking out more and more and more, and it's like you're on an acid.
Yep, so good.
I think those sequences are the moments that get the closest to capturing the feel of Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum, and that's where I would have liked to see them go for. Especially, it kind of sucks we got an entire game with Scarecrow as the main villain, and we didn't do any of that stuff again.
I know.
Which is like my big I like Arkham Knight a lot, but that's still the biggest downgrade. Is this was where you really got to play with the fact that not only are you doing a Batman experience, but in the same way that the Batman comics at the time were fucking with the medium of comics and how you can feel when reading an issue and changing different types of panel layouts, and Final Crisis was just about to fucking the downfall of the universe means that story structure itself is falling apart and has to be reassembled by the heroes and all of that. While that's going on, this game was also like, yeah, we can do that in the game as well, and even better because you're the Batman. We can make you feel it on a direct level. We can change your controller. We can do all of this. And as we've only gotten better with VR and everything, we got an Arkham VR game of everything, and it doesn't do any of that stuff. It just content to get more safe, I guess, with the Batman universe. We don't get as weird with this game again. Like, this game is where the Arkham universe felt the most. It could get comic booky. The giant poison ivy plants that you start fighting and you have to blow up as you go through, that fire key blasts at you basically, and then you've got like you got Killer Croc, you got Bane, you've got more supernatural things where it's implied there's actually a ghost, or is it just Quincy Sharp going insane? Like it's left vague. There's more trippy Batman elements in this game, and I would have liked to see that come up more. More so because the seeds of it are here. It still isn't. Those Scarecrow sequences are so good because they are so infrequent and they are so against the rest of what the game is that they stand out more. But I would have liked to see just what would it look like when you're dealing with these more esoteric Batman threats later on. So again, that's not a problem with this game, but I think it's relevant to mention given despite this being what many people are like, oh yeah, if we ever go Scarecrow combat, we can do the new dream sequences like this, and we never do it. So that was probably my biggest disappointment with the Arkham sequence is we got serious Batman, we nailed it, but we never quite got that pulp, acid singed punk pop crime Batman ever again in this franchise, which sucks to me.
I love that.
Bring it full circle. It helps that this game was conceived of in a really simple way, and the Arkham verse and trying to flesh that out is ultimately what killed any dream of doing that.
I guess while we've got some time actually, and you do mention the Arkham verse being what kind of you became, you hate it. I don't know, we've got some time. Do you want to do a soapbox about that, Steve? Or your problems with the Arkhamverse as a whole before we close out?
So my big thing with the Arkhamverse is, at the end of the day, Arkham Asylum is a really fun, like, one-shot experience where you don't have to have any context for any of the characters or anything that's happening. You just kind of jump in the middle of Batman, and it can happen at any point, anywhere. That's the fun. That's what makes it universal. You get to Arkham City, and you can kind of do that, but it's very heavily dependent on what happened with Arkham Asylum, and there's a lot of history built in, and there's a lot of characters that get introduced randomly that don't make any sense. I think I mentioned this at some point, but in Arkham Asylum, there's a Riddler trophy that's a pun on Tommy Elliott and Hush hadn't happened yet, but then he shows up in Arkham City, and so like some of that stuff starts to break down, but that's not a big deal. But then you get to Arkham Knight, and suddenly what becomes of these games and what becomes of Batman in general, and this is good because we're timing on the announcement of the Death in the Family movie, is Batman's story gets truncated into like 3 or 4 very, very basic and very boring things that we just do over and over again, which is Year One, Dark Knight Returns, Death of the Family, Killing Joke, and Under the Hood. And that's all we do. And every time we give ourselves a chance to do some sort of like new or interesting imaginative take, the moment it gets popular, the first thing you got to do is rope in Year One, Dark Knight Returns, Killing Joke, Death in the Family, and Under the Red Hood. And the Arkham games very slowly but surely fall into that exact formula when you get Origins, when you get the stuff with Hush, when you get all of Arkham Knight, which was really disappointing because their whole thing was that Arkham Knight was an original character and just lied straight to our faces about that.
Straight to us.
So obvious, like 5 minutes into that game.
But then, like, to be fair with that, that's one of the things I funny, because they did eventually, in the comics, make Arkham Knight an original character, and he's even more boring. So, you know what? I'll take Jason Todd.
So, like, they don't even, like, because that's the thing. As far as Arkham Asylum is concerned, you don't even know if as far as Arkham Asylum and Arkham City are concerned, you don't even know if Jason Todd happened.
Exactly.
And then you get to Arkham Knight, and you're like, who is the Arkham Knight, Alfred? I have to find out. And then you start getting all these flashbacks about Jason, and you're just like, well, gee, I wonder.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, by the time you get to Arkham Knight, they have to justify that they didn't spend any time setting up the canonical stories of this universe, and they just shove it all in there really, really hard and really obviously. And I mean, I like Arkham Knight. I think it's a fun game.
For sure.
But that's the problem I have, and I think the Arkhamverse is a really good sort of like microcosm of this problem we have, which is every time we do anything new, innovative, or original with Batman, the first thing that has to happen is you bring it back to the boring, bland stuff, regardless of whether or not it fits.
Especially when in the sequel to this, you killed the Joker in a phenomenal way.
Yeah.
And then, look, I go back and forth on Arkham Knight a lot. There are things I like, there are things I don't like, there are things I love, there are things I hate. I don't know that it fully takes advantage of the fact that you just told a story where you killed Joker. Now let's do something with that. And I don't know that they fully do. And that's totally a discussion for another time. Don't get me wrong. That has very little to do with Arkham Asylum as an individual game, but it's hard not to look at it as a broader franchise, and it's really hard not to look at it as this influential game in the industry. I mean, this game was as influential on the game industry as like Batman Begins was on the movie industry. Like if Batman Begins started this wave of like dark gritty reboots, which it arguably did, then Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man doesn't happen unless this game happens.
Which is really funny because Alfie's point earlier was that the only good superhero video games were Spider-Man video games.
Yeah.
Then Batman comes along, completely reinvents the wheel, and now the good Spider-Man game is an Arkham game.
Well, I'll also give my Alfie is truly woke take here is the revolutionary free flow combat that everyone praises. Happened in Ultimate Spider-Man first. Just saying. Ultimate Spider-Man PS2 did this combat first, but no one mentions it, so
It is very similar. I'll give you that. It is very
Ultimate
similar.
Spider-Man is an underrated gem. I fucking love that game.
Oh,
Dude,
hell
Ultimate
yeah.
Spider-Man, Web of Shadows, and Shattered Dimensions all deserve way more love.
Yes.
But we're not here to talk about them as much as I love them.
Why
But
not?
we are going to talk about, unless we've got anything else we want to go for alcohol. Oh yes, I guess we should do ratings. Yeah, I see. This is why I'm a bad host. All right. With all of that said and done, and going through the depths of Arkham Asylum and losing our sanity and coming back out of it stronger, better, and Batmaner than before, we are going to now. What are your ratings for Arkham Asylum? Let's go Matt first.
On a pure 5-point scale, with no halvesies allowed,
No.
I would give this a full 5 fucking baller scarecrow needle gloves out of 5. It has its flaws for sure. I'm definitely not blind to them, but it's one of those things, like almost like what we were talking about with Gotham Knight. I think it really does nail exactly what it's setting out to do. And I'm so engrossed in it, and I'm so engrossed in the experience of playing it, that I really, those flaws just sort of fall to the wayside a little bit. On a 10 scale, I'm probably giving it like a 4, like 4.5 or some shit. But no, on a 5-point scale, 5 out of 5. Love it. Great game. Would recommend.
Okay. For me, it's been something that, again, I kind of solidified on my opinion on as I've replayed these games over and over and over again. But it's always cool to talk with people who get more enjoyment out of it. In that sense, like, again, the idea of it being play it in one night is probably the best ideal way to do it. If I ever go back to this again, which I will, I'll definitely be able to make sure I keep that in mind, because some days I do just split up like between 2 days or something, when I just like 100% it with all the Riddler trophies, which thankfully is possible in this game. So that is something I think has given me a little bit of a new perspective on it, but overall I still think this is the Arkham game I will go back to the least, but it's one that without it we wouldn't have had any of the others, or really any kind of the pedigree you put behind. Because even the Spider-Man games, they got good ratings, but they were never the AAA titles that people praised. They were always kind of just like movie tie-ins, or came out around movies, like to celebrate. And this came out around a movie, but this was more so setting up the template that comic book IPs can be big system sellers. They can be big. Like Rocksteady was made by this, and I'm sure whatever the next superhero property will be, they'll get made by that again. But like this was definitely the one where comic book games got that extra oomph, and I'll always be thankful for that, because what a great medium to explore these superhero characters in is a video game. So I'm gonna give it 4 out of 5 Riddler trophies.
Nice.
All right. Damn, am I gonna give it the lowest score? I didn't mean
no.
for that to happen.
This is me. I talk shit, but I'm just a softie.
Okay. So I really enjoy this game. It's one of my favorite video game experiences. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. It does represent for me a lot of stuff about Batman as a concept and a character and as part of an industry that I just loathe. And it's hard to get away from that sometimes, especially because I love Batman so much. It's really hard to just like think of any one thing in a vacuum when I think of it's in relation to everything else that's ever happened with that character. So Arkham's Asylum, I think, is the most of any of these games where I feel like I can detach from that, which is why I really enjoy it. But it's hard still to like get a pure enough experience when there's so much of it that doesn't quite work the way it ought to. The boss fights being a big thing. The voice acting sometimes, the design sometimes, fucking detective mode ruining the entire aesthetic. So I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 5 random giant fucking bat wings that drop off tiny equipment out of fucking nowhere and blow the roof off of the building that you could have used 6 other times during this night.
Yep.
How long do you think it's going to be before we finally get to fly that thing?
Oh god.
Oh, I was so bummed by Origins when you couldn't.
Yeah,
Like,
what a fucking
what's the point of
cutie.
fast travel if you can't use it?
I would have preferred that to the Batmobile, honestly. Batmobile doesn't make any sense as a traffic. Gotham no. Batmobile can't exist. It's the thing that breaks the suspension of at least for Batman. Flying Batmobile is always the right idea. So Batwing, I'll take that.
That's the thing that would have saved that game because you're not just running over people all day.
Exactly, right? That's how you do an open world Batman game. You don't give them a fucking car because obviously players are going to want to run people over. That's just the thing that's going to happen.
We've all played GTA where you know where this goes.
Exactly. All right.
Doesn't help that it's a giant tank. I like the Batmobile design in this game. It's
Oh,
all
yeah.
sleek and shit.
I
It's like
very
really
much
cool.
like that. You can pick that as a skin in Arkham Knight. That made me happy.
Yes, I love it. I always do. It's the best.
All right. With all that said and done, I actually did think of a topic for next week that we're going to be doing, so I'm going to pick it.
Oh man.
Because of our conversation here, kind of. And this is more related to a lot of things with Green Lantern at the moment, a lot of things with Commissioner Gordon, me writing my own Batman series. This is a conversation that's come up a lot in our writers group chat that I really want to get a whole discussion out about. And that is the relationship between superheroes and the police.
Oh boy.
And what to do with that.
Oh boy. We have a meaty episode next week again.
Yeah, because I just think like that's something that just we have to talk about it. Like overdue, really. But yeah, so that's going to be next week. With all that said and done, we have been your geeky gentlemen. I am the champion of the oppressed.
I'm the Sonic erotica lover.
And I'm Batman.
Nice. And we will be discussing things. And I can just like static just starts coming as a scarecrow dream sequence. It's like, oh man, no!